Good morning again. We're continuing to look through Luke chapter 15, and we've seen so far how there are people that are gathering around Jesus. Some are called sinners and tax collectors, those who are obviously walking away from God and living an immoral type of life. And then there are the religious leaders who are doing their best to be religious, to know God's word and to obey God's word. And so Jesus tells these parables, three parables in this chapter, to address those two groups of people. In the first one, there's a lost sheep, and in the second one, there's a lost coin. And each of them get lost, and the owner goes into great lengths to find what has been lost. And then he's been setting up for what comes next to Luke chapter 15. Verse 11, which is the story of the prodigal son. And I just want to mention, I'm really looking forward to speaking about this on Sunday. And I want to mention this book, The Prodigal God by Timothy Keller, which is where I'm just going to share it a little bit with you. And he's really dug deep into this parable. So a lot of the insights I'm sharing I've gleaned from this book, The Prodigal God. And he named it The Prodigal God because the word prodigal is synonymous with spending everything you have, and giving everything, as this son did. And he says that in this parable, he's seeing how God is the one who has given up everything. So that's why he names the book The Prodigal God. So here in Luke 15, verse 11, Jesus says, there was a young man, or a man, who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but not one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back home to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." Let me just stop there for a moment. So one of the things I was able to get from this book is how, when we hear this parable, the prodigal son, the lost son, right? The younger son is obviously representing the sinners and the tax collectors that we see in the beginning of the chapter. That's obviously who it means, right? This young guy who takes a lot of money and just blows it on partying and wild living. And it's heartwarming to us when we see this story of this guy who runs away from his father. Like, we can run away from God, but yet he comes back and his father accepts him. Because it says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him, right? So it's heartwarming. One thing Timothy Keller says is, you got to remember, the people hearing this at that time would not have thought that it made any sense, would not have had any just warm feelings in their heart or tears in their eyes. He says that a traditional Middle Eastern father would have been expected to respond to such a request by driving the son out of the family with nothing except physical blows. There's only two sons. So for him to get his inheritance before his father dies, because the inheritance would be given when his father had passed away. So he's saying, I don't want to wait till you're dead. I want my inheritance now. And since there's only two sons, he has to divide it up. And the younger son would get a third, the older would get 2/3. So we're talking about a third of his property. And it says that he divided his property, but the word that it uses for property is bios, where we get the word biology. It's a word for life. So he divided his life up. So here Timothy Keller says, he says, the younger brother then is asking his father to tear his life apart. And the father does so for the love of his son. So he's saying most of the Middle Eastern listeners there, they're like, they're shocked. They hear that the son has done this and asked such a request. They're thinking, man, you got to drive that guy out. You got to kick him out. He doesn't deserve to be your son. But then this father does that and divides his property. I mean, his wealth was in the land, and it was probably given through generations, right? It's probably his great grandfather's land. He gave it to his grandfather, gave it to his dad, he gave it to him. And now his son he doesn't want the land, he wants the money, right? And this father does it. And then the son leaves, takes off, spends every cent. And then again, when the listeners are hearing this and they hear that the son is coming back home, and they're thinking, oh, this is going to be good, right? This dad, man, this better be a good one. This boy's coming back, and there's no way he's going to be let back into the family. There's no way he's going to be forgiven. There's no way, and without really, really, really having to earn his way back in. And Jesus says the father sees him while he's still a long way off and runs out to meet him, throws his arms around him, kisses him, right? That again is that's the part that's heartwarming for us. So the people listening to it at this time would have been, what, this is crazy. That would never happen. And the amazing thing is that it is crazy, but it has happened, right? Jesus, the Father we have all run away from God to some degree, and he has come out running for us, willing, even though even though we've squandered, even though we've used everything for ourselves, even though we don't deserve it, he comes running to welcome us into the family. So we'll talk more about this tomorrow, because we're going to see that the story is not only about the younger son, but the older brother. And we'll take a look at him tomorrow. So the Lord bless you. I want to ask you again, if you're watching, please comment and leave something to let me know that who this is ministering to and blessing. I'd love to know. And just encouraging to keep the videos going. So God bless you, and see you tomorrow.